Hey everyone, Joe Brady here, and this video is a sampler, a free sample for you to see the type of teaching that I like to do when I'm explaining how to use Lightroom and Photoshop to enhance your photography. Now, in this particular image, I've got an image from Arches National Park. It's kind of flat, it's this interesting place, but the shape is all wrong, the light is all wrong, the color is all wrong, and that's what we're going to fix. So we're going to start in Lightroom. We're going to do the edits we can do in Lightroom first. I'm going to send it into Photoshop for some special things that only Photoshop can do, and then bring it back to Lightroom to finish up. So let's see how that works. Just take a look at a couple of things. Compositionally, yeah, too much sky, too much going on up here. Obviously, it's too dark in the foreground, and the color is desaturated. However, let's look at the original capture. Let's look up here at the histogram. Let's make it a little bigger. The histogram is what tells us the exposure in the image. And going from left to right, where this is black and this is white, it is showing that we've got a lot of stuff over on the light side. Well, that's obviously the sky. But nothing is actually hitting pure black or pure white, which is really good. Basically, what this is telling us is that's a perfect exposure because we've got it over to the right, but there's no clipping, meaning none of the highlights are gone. And one way we can find that out is right in the histogram, there's a little arrow box up here, and nothing's going on. If anything was clipping, in fact, let me just bring up the exposure a lot so you can see. When it clips, it turns red when this box here is turned on. Conversely, let's bring that back. We'll just double click on exposure. Conversely, is there anything pure black? No, because that would be showing in blue. If I bring the exposure down, you see then these things start to turn blue. That means they are pure black. So the exposure is good, and this is one of those times when our camera just doesn't see the way your eyes see. You can see so much more tonal range than your camera can. So let's see what Lightroom can do for us. In an image like this, the first thing we need to do is, well, we've got this great sky, but it's too bright. So let's bring the highlights down, and let's bring the shadows up. That evens things out a little bit. Whites and blacks are fine. Let's come down to presence. And presence is sort of, think of it as localized contrast. So I'm going to add some texture, which is fairly light. Clarity, I'm going to add less because it is a lot stronger effect. And dehaze, I don't think the foreground needs it, probably the sky a little bit. So we're going to do that locally instead of globally. These are global edits we're doing. Let's add some vibrance. And vibrance is increasing the saturation of cooler colors like blues and greens. You can see if I bring it all the way up, it just affects the blues. Don't ever do that, by the way. That'll just make it look crazy. And then we'll add some overall saturation. All right, so if you hit the backslash key, you can see there's where we started. There's where we are so far. So we're on the right track, but there's still a lot to do. Let's work on some global edits. Let's work on some local edits. I'm going to use the graduated filter tool here. And the way this tool works is you click and you drag directionally. So I'm dragging from the top down. If you want to really understand what it's doing, hit the O key, or conversely down the bottom here, click on Show the Mask Overlay. That shows you what the area is that's being selected. So I'm going to hit the O key to toggle that off. Now let's add some dehaze to the sky, so we can start to bring that out. That looks a heck of a lot better. Now, however, when you do this, typically the sky has the tendency to shift color a little bit. In this case, it went a little bit towards the cyan. So let's counter that by adding a little bit of yellow back into the sky. Still not perfect, so there's another way we're going to do this. Also, notice, although you're not really seeing much of an effect, technically we are affecting the tip of this structure, which, by the way, is called turret arch. If we hit the O key again, you can see that it's still affecting it. And again, by the way this graduated filter works is you see there's three lines. The one in the middle is the 50% point. The top line, which you can't see right now, there, the top line, which you see right through the arch. Everything from here back is affected at 100% of whatever you do to the sliders over on the right. From here to the middle is from 100% to 50%, and then it fades from 50% to 0. And you can adjust this after the fact. You can also rotate it. If you come off on the line, you can rotate it at angles. Now, what we've done is we've really affected mostly the sky, and then from here to here it fades to 0. But it may be affecting the color of the actual arch a little bit as well. So one of the beauties of Lightroom with its graduated tool is you have the ability to use a brush. So if I click on the brush, what I want to do is I want to subtract this graduated filter off of the arch. So to do that, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and notice it turns the middle of that to a minus. I also, on the right-hand side here, have Auto Mask turned on, because that's going to only select things that are directly underneath that minus. So notice as I do it, it subtracts the rock from it, but it leaves the sky alone because that's a different color and tone. And I can come all the way through the arch formation here. In fact, I can start just clicking in the brush over here. I don't know what this tree is, but whatever it's called. And notice it's just getting the tree and still leaving the sky behind it alone. So now I'm going to turn off the overlay. We're still live. As long as this dot is black, we're live. And now it's only affecting the sky. I'm going to bring down the saturation of the sky a little bit because we're going to attack this a slightly different way. So let's hit done with this one. And before we get to some more of these color edits, let's take a look at the foreground. What's wrong with the foreground? Well, maybe it's a little bit too dark. Maybe the shadows are too dark. Let's get a graduated filter again. And this time we're going to click and drag up from the bottom. And let's open up the shadows a little bit. Yeah, that looks a little better. Now we still have deep shadows in the tree, and we're not getting those because, again, if we click on our overlay, you can see it's not making it up to the tree. So just like we subtracted them from the previous one, now I'm just going to leave it alone, and the default is a plus. I still have Auto Mask turned on. Now I'm just going to click and drag through the tree, or just click on the individual branches and pine needles. And now I'm adding just the tree to this. And again, notice, even though my circle is much bigger than that area, it's just selecting the thing underneath the plus symbol, because that is telling it only select things that match that tone that are within the circle. So let's turn off the overlay. So now we've opened up the shadows in this tree as well. So again, that quickly, we're looking a lot better. And again, if we hit the backslash key, you can see there's our before and after so far, but there's still more to do. So for example, the sky, I'm not thrilled with the sky color. It's gone again a little bit cyan to me. So we're going to move down to this tool here called HSL, which stands for Hue, Saturation, Luminance. And we're going to click on Hue, click on this, which is the Targeted Adjustment tool. And I'm going to come over top of this blue that's gone a little weird for me. It needs more blue. So if I push up, you can see it pushes it all the way to purple. If I come down, it takes it completely to cyan. I want it up a little bit. And I'm thinking 12 or so is probably going to be good. And it is. That looks pretty good while we're there. What else? Is there any other things that need some color adjustment? Yeah, guess what? The greens in the trees are kind of weak. So we can just cut to the chase and bring up the greens. In fact, there's also some yellows in there. So let's add some yellow as well. Actually, I didn't want to do that. Scratch that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to saturation. I want to bring up the greens. So let's click right on, we'll click right on one of these green things here. And what it's saying is that it's actually more yellow than green. And you can see that over in the slider. When I put the crosshairs on something, it highlights the slider. However, I know there's greens in there also. So let's just cut to the chase and bring up the greens. And while we're doing that, we can bring up the luminance, or the brightness, just of the greens to bring them up. So let's do that. Let's bring those up. And I'm going to manually bring up the greens. All right, looking much better. So let's just hit done. And again, backslash, that's where we were. That's where we are now. Now, as I'm looking at the sky, I think I might want a little bit more contrast in it. So I can go back to the graduated filter, click on the dot that was the sky, and again, I can hit the O key to show me, yep, that's the sky. Let's add some contrast to it. That looks good. And color temperature wise, I think it still is a little bit too cyan. I'm going to add a little yellow into it. And I'm going to bring up the highlights and bring down the shadows, just to add a little more color and contrast to the sky. All right, so what else is wrong? Well, if I was with you as you took this picture, I probably would have suggested, well, maybe you should move a little closer so that there's a clearer path in between here to the arch, but it is what it is. We've got this brush here, it's stuck there. But what are the other distractions? Well, we've got this branch over here. Could we get rid of that? Yeah, but not in Photoshop. However, let's look at the composition. This is our subject, this thing right here. This is really just a distraction. Also, there's this rock sitting right in the lower left-hand corner, and there's some stuff here too. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to end up cropping this. But let's save that for last. We're going to do that after we go into Photoshop and then come back. But right so far, what we've done, again, hitting the backslash key, we've gone from there to there. It's looking pretty good. Now, there's some other things I want to do, but we're going to have to do in Photoshop. For one, I want to compress the foreground. I want to get rid of these rocks on either side. And there's some interesting stuff in the sky here, but the distance from the top of the arch to the top of the image is too great. This, again, this is our subject. We need to get rid of stuff that isn't exactly helping the image. So let's bring this into Photoshop first, and then we'll come back and finish it off in Lightroom. Now, the way to go into Photoshop while you're in Lightroom is simply edit in Photoshop, or Command E. That is a shortcut that you will remember. On a Windows machine, by the way, it's Control E. So we hit Command E, and it will automatically take this image and open it up in Photoshop for us. All right, so here's our image in Photoshop. First thing I like to do in Photoshop is to duplicate this background layer. So I always have one that hasn't been touched should I need to get back to it. So to do that, you have two ways to do that are quick. You can drag the layer to the little square with the plus in it, or Command or Control J, which is another keyboard shortcut you're going to be using all the time. Okay, so I mentioned there were some things that needed to go, and that's where Photoshop's Content Aware Fill is the greatest tool. So I'm going to click with the lasso. It's called the lasso tool. Drag around it and come up to Edit, Fill, Content Aware. Now you might have noticed there was a keyboard shortcut there, Shift F5, another one you'll learn. But let's just hit OK. And look at that, it's gone. How cool is that? That's one of the amazing things in Photoshop. Same thing on the lower right here. Let's do the same thing for this. This time I'm going to hit Shift F5. It comes right up to Content Aware, and Photoshop works its magic and gets rid of those rocks. Wonderful. Oh, there's something here too. I don't know what that is, but it's a distraction. So if it's a distraction, it's got to go. If it's not helping the image, it needs to go. Now, as I mentioned, I could get rid of this. This is going to really get cropped out, but let's just see how good a job Photoshop could do. Now, yes, Lightroom does have some spot removal tools that will do some of this, but nothing this extensive. If it's this extensive, you're going to have to go into Photoshop. So again, Shift F5, Content Aware, and those branches are gone. Now, we're definitely going to crop over here, so no worries. Now, I mentioned the sky was too tall, and the bottom is probably too long. We really want to focus on here. So watch this. This is a really cool thing that only Photoshop can do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the marquee tool, which is this square just above the top. And I'm going to select most of the top of the image and use an amazing tool in Photoshop called Content Aware Scale. I'm going to hold down the Shift key because I only wanted to do it in one direction. And I'm going to scrunch the sky down a little bit so that I can get a little more of these open clouds. Then I'm going to hit Enter. Notice it did not affect the top of the arch. How it figures that out, no idea. All right, so let's do the same thing for the bottom. I'm going to select the entire bottom of the image, and we're going to use Content Aware Scale. Again, holding down the Shift to have it just come up, and look what it does. Look how that works. Isn't that amazing? So I'm going to bring that up. And why? So you might ask, why am I doing this? The reason is that the physical height of the bottom of the image up to the arch was bigger than the arch itself. That was making it too powerful in the image. So let me deselect that, which is Command or Control D. And if I turn off the original background layer, here's what we're left with. So looking a lot better. Now I don't need the rest of the image, so I'm going to Command or Control click on the layer on the little picture there, and then just come up to Image, Crop, and it will get rid of everything that we no longer need. One last thing I want to do in Photoshop before we go back into Lightroom. And that is we're going to do a little bit of light painting to help the viewer get to the arch. So to do that, we're going to create a blank layer, which is again the little rectangle with the plus in it. We're going to change. No, we're not going to change. We're not going to do something else first. We're going to go to Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill it with 50% gray. And hit OK. And you're thinking, well, that's not particularly helpful. But we're going to change something called the blending mode. And through the courses, we explain all this in detail, how these things work. We're going to change it to overlay. Basically, what overlay does is anything that's 50% gray is transparent. Anything that is darker will darken the layer below. Anything that's lighter will lighten the layer below. So we can get a brush, make a nice big brush here. Now you can see I've got black in the foreground. I'm just going to paint at 10%. Now the default is probably 100. And if you quickly want to change these opacities, you can just type on your keyboard. If you want 10%, just type 1 and watch what happens up in the opacity here. It changes to 10. And also this is cumulative. So if you keep doing it, it keeps adding. So I want to darken these areas that are away from the arch that are not helping us get there. Even off in the distance here on the right, it's a little too light. Let's go a little smaller with our brush. Let's darken the horizon there and through there. Now, conversely, I want to have actually the base of the arch. In fact, while we're at it, all of the areas that are a little darker on the arch, let's do that. It will add some contrast to the arch. Now, conversely, I'm going to hit the X key, which will switch black with white, and I'm going to draw a literal path of light on both sides heading up to the arch. Also, some of the bushes have gone a little too dark. So let's go ahead and lighten those up as well, just so that don't become a distraction, because if something is too dark, your eye is drawn to that as well. So I'm just going to open up here, and it might not look like we've done much, but watch what happens if I hide this layer by hitting on the eyeball here. Look at the difference before and after, how it changes where you look. Now, I could do an initial crop in here just so we can see really what we're going to end up with. In fact, let's do that. Let's hit the C key. Oops, I got a square here for some reason. All right, so I'm thinking probably something like this. Probably going to want a little bit less of this, but something about like that is going to be our composition. So let's try that. We'll hit enter. Yeah, we need to cut off a little sky, move it left to right a little bit, but that's good. Let's send it back into Lightroom to do that. And to do that, we just go to File, Save. File, Save. And what that does is automatically saves the changes and brings it back into Lightroom right next to the original image we were editing. So here's our image back into Lightroom. Let's take a look at the crop. Let's do a crop in Lightroom here. And that's what I had chosen. I'll move it around a little bit to see what's going to work best. And maybe a little bit of the rock on the left. I want to get the entire formation not dead center. We don't want to have it dead center because that becomes very static. Let's get it at least off to one side a bit. And we've got our grid here. By the way, this is called the golden ratio grid rather than the more common rule of thirds grid. I think this works much better for landscapes. And that, by the way, is under Tools, Crop Guide Overlay, Golden Ratio. There it is. So let's hit Done. Let's hit Enter on that. There's our new crop. And I think we're looking pretty good. I think we can really call it a day on this particular image. And let's go ahead to full screen. When you think that, here's what we started with. Again, an interesting scene, but the light and the color and the tone and the composition is all wrong. Our star of the subject is too small. There's too much stuff going on. By doing what we did, taking it through both Lightroom and Photoshop, we got rid of the distractions. We've really cut down to the essence of the place, And there we go. That's what we ended up with. Looks pretty cool. All right, so there you have it. That's how the courses work if you haven't gotten one from me before. It's very conversational. It's what can we do to make this a better image and show you the tools in both Lightroom and Photoshop and how they can help you do that. So that's the kind of example. If you haven't gotten one of my courses yet, there's a free sample as to what they look like. The way one of my customers explained it was she had bought the courses and she said it was like having Joe sit next to you in front of the computer. I thought that was a wonderful thing to say and I thank her for that. So I think you'll enjoy them too. Learn how to do this stuff, but not just how, but learn why. And your images are going to look so much better. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. And there's a lot more waiting for you. Bye-bye.